right. We're going to get started here. I know some folks are up with the exhibitors and love to hear the conversation. I know there are old friendships and new friendships being fostered here, and it's really great to have you here. So we welcome to all who are gathered for the National Catholic Restorative Justice Conference. Those here in person and those joining online, you're very welcome here. Welcome to the University of St. Thomas School of Law, and welcome to Minneapolis and the Twin Cities metropolitan area. Thank you for your presence, your faith, and the gifts you bring to our gathering. My name is Father Daniel Griffith, Dan Griffith. I'm a priest of the Archdiocese of St. Paul and Minneapolis. I serve as the Wenger Family Fellow of Law here at the law school and serve as the law school's founding director of the Initiative on Restorative Justice and Healing. And I also serve as pastor of the Basilica of St. Mary just down the road, which some of us will attend our closing mass and final dinner. I want to thank volunteers from the Basilica of St. Mary who are here. Julie Craven gathered them and really thank them. So if we could thank all the volunteers, including those from the Basilica. Julie Craven, Associate Director of the Initiative, and I are delighted to be co-hosting this National Restorative Justice Conference with our friends at Catholic Mobilizing Network, CMN. CMN, based in Washington, D.C., focuses on mobilizing Catholics to end the death penalty and also the promotion of restorative justice. I thank Krisanne Vaillancourt Murphy, Caitlin Morneau, and their fantastic team for all their hard work and collaboration that has gone into planning and hosting this conference. Together, we are heartened that you have joined us for this important conversation over the next 3 days. Grounded in the Catholic intellectual tradition, the Initiative on Restorative Justice and Healing was launched just over 2 years ago with a threefold focus on naming and helping heal harm that comes from clergy sexual abuse and leadership failures in the Catholic Church, racial injustice, and societal polarization. We seek to educate law students that there is another way, another path. We seek to educate law students to be big picture lawyers. We also educate Catholics and all people of goodwill and enter into dialogue about the positive potential of RJ, restorative justice, to foster accompaniment, dialogue, accountability, and healing. The theme of our conference this week is Journeying Toward Restoration. This marks our universal desire, a human desire, for healing and wholeness in response to harm, and communicates that this is a journey. As we sojourn together in faith to embrace a better future for the Church and for society. Our conference has 4 primary focus areas: racial injustice, harms against Native Americans, clergy sexual abuse and leadership failures in the Church, and criminal legal reform. Specifically, we will delve into how RJ can promote dialogue, understanding, and accountability across these areas in a way that helps heal the wounds from harm. Our time this afternoon will set forth important context as we read the signs of the times and lay the foundation of a distinctive Catholic approach to restorative justice. While the dynamism of restorative justice in Catholic social teaching will be explored and highlighted, it must be acknowledged in justice and with candor that the Church throughout her history has been a source of grace and, at times, a source of harm, and has served both as healer and wounder. One of the many negative effects of clergy abuse and leadership failures in the Catholic Church, now of global scope, is that the moral voice of the Church and Church leaders has been significantly compromised. And our good friend, late friend Tom Johnson at Georgetown University, was on a panel, referred to the harm against those who were victimized by clergy's sexual abuse as the inversion of the moral order, literally turned on its head. Catholic social teaching and restorative justice offer a sharp rebuke of past and present sins and failures and the great harm wrought by them by individuals and institutions, but also offers a positive pathway back to greater integrity and healing in the church and beyond. It must also be acknowledged that the land on which this conference takes place was land inhabited by the Dakota people. This was their home. This land taken from them in injustice and through subjugation is indeed a crime and a harm. I think of the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that our nation was born in genocide. In far too many places, the Catholic Church was complicit in cultural genocide and the attendant effects of generational trauma. This harm must not only be named, but the injustices repaired. Much work needs to be done in the work of repairing these harms. As St. Thomas University President Rob Vischer will soon note in his greeting, our gathering here in the Twin Cities is at the intersection of two ground zero places. Within an archdiocese that 8 years ago was criminally charged for its failure to protect children, and in a city, Minneapolis, that just a few miles away saw the brutal killing of George Floyd, which sparked a national racial reckoning and worldwide protests in response to racial injustice. Ground zero places can also be locations from which true justice and healing spring. If we have the courage to confront the underlying systems and injustices that perpetuate harm and exclusion. And I mentioned President Rob Vischer. When we proposed this initiative to Rob Vischer, he was dean of our law school. And I thank Rob. We would not be here had Rob not seen the foresight, or had the foresight, to really quickly and with enthusiasm greenlight this initiative. I am filled with hope that these days will be consequential and inspiring as we seek to discern how we can work together to build a more just church and society. I am filled with hope because I believe that the Holy Spirit is out ahead of us, calling us together to be instruments of humility, of justice, and healing. That this group of people, and it's a splendid group, Christians and others, people of faith, have gathered in this place at this time, is to me a compelling sign of the Spirit's presence at work, working with Jesus to recreate and restore all that has been harmed and wounded. This gathering represents a grassroots movement in the Catholic Church. This is the grassroots movement in the Catholic Church, and indeed, this is the first in-person national Catholic conference of those committed to the work of restoration and healing. So who's in the room for this conference? Victim survivors, practitioners, Catholic parishioners and leaders, clergy, scholars from various academic disciplines, victim advocates, law students, lawyers, and ministry leaders in the Catholic Church and beyond. We also have members of the Catholic Mobilizing Network Board and members of the IRJH Board, and a few, Cheryl and Mary Novak come to mind, who are members of both boards. And so we thank and welcome all of our board members. Many of us are here because we have witnessed and experienced the powerful potential of RJ to uniquely respond to harm in a way that fosters healing. Practitioners have seen this, and it is humbling to see. Rooted historically in the wisdom and culture of First Nation peoples of North America and New Zealand, today restorative justice has become a worldwide movement across multiple disciplines and professions. This movement has flourished globally because RJ is effective. It's inclusive of multiple stakeholders, adaptable to various circumstances, and consistent with human nature and our desire for flourishing and healing. RJ is a philosophical and practical approach to harm that asks who was harmed, what was the nature of the harm, and how can it be repaired. As Howard Zehr, the great restorative justice teacher and practitioner, has communicated, RJ is fundamentally about needs and obligations. As we will soon explore, restorative justice has a willing and potent partner when paired with Catholic social teaching and Christian ethics. But as our colleague at St. Thomas and fellow of our initiative will say this afternoon, Amy Liebad, there's also divergences in the approach and method, and so we'll explore those as well. But with so many correlations and values and approaches that exist between RJ and Catholic social teaching, it gives rise to a dynamism when they are paired. As we begin our gathering, it seems important to put our dialogue and work into spiritual context. The work of healing and restoration is integral to the ministry of Jesus Christ. It is fundamental to the mission of the Catholic Church. And this is why Tom referred to it as an inversion of the moral order when people were victimized. The one harmed is the person on the side of the road in the story of the Good Samaritan. Jesus invites us, even commands us to get close to those who are wounded, to listen, to lift up, to bind wounds, to accompany, and to help repair the harm experienced by our sisters and brothers. The image that comes to me so often in the work of restorative justice is that of Christ descending into the pit of despair and death after his crucifixion, to lift up all that have been broken and fallen to new life. Our work aligns too with the vision of Pope Francis, calling the Church to go to the peripheries, to center the peripheries, and to be a field hospital, to be a place of refuge and healing for those who have been wounded. In Rome, a synod is taking place which shares many values and a similar methodology to restorative justice, including respectful and inclusive listening and dialogue. Our work here, friends, simply is the work of Jesus, and I say that with humility and also with some awe. And we also see the face of Jesus reflected in those who have suffered harm. 3 images of restorative justice have been impressed on me recently by friends and colleagues, all of whom are here, who exhort that RJ sets forth a different path. Specifically, Monsignor Guion in a blog wrote that just as the human body, when bruised and broken, is oriented to physical healing, so the human soul is oriented to spiritual and emotional healing when wounded. Professor Mark Osler, in speaking to our law students yesterday, said that where traditional criminal legal system often comes down with weight on the least powerful, with process complexity is what he called it, restorative justice is a story complex enterprise. Restorative justice invites us into the complexity and reality of individual stories in a way that fosters a more relational and human approach. Speaking last evening at the Basilica of St. Mary, Professor Daniel Philpott said that a Catholic approach to restorative justice is consistent with Eucharistic justice, which through God's grace establishes comprehensive right relationship and transformation and calls us forth to transform the world. Speaking personally, my ministry in the area of restorative justice and my work with victim survivors and others who have been harmed has been one of the greatest gifts that I have experienced in my ministry as a priest. I remember the powerful encounters in West Virginia. I remember a woman saying to Julie, we were there on Ash Wednesday and it was sleeting, she said, "We finally have hope. Somebody's come to listen and accompany." And restorative justice must lead to accountability and transformative justice. It must lead to that fuller sense of justice. I remember the man in the Duluth diocese who said, "Father, without accountability, there isn't restoration. There isn't restorative justice." I'm humbled and heartened by this work. It is challenging, important, and sometimes messy. Restorative justice, I hope, has made me a better priest, pastor, friend, and colleague. My thought is that practitioners would say it has in their lives, in your lives as well. I am learning every day I do this work, and I look forward to where this journey will take all of us gathered here this week. I would like to thank all of our sponsors of this National Restorative Justice Conference. Seeing these national and local sponsors listed in your conference program and their commitment to this work is inspiring and gives me hope for the potential of RJ and the Catholic Church to bear good fruit in the months and years ahead. I'm reminded, too, that the United States is a ground zero place, both with clergy sexual abuse in the church and also in the killing of George Floyd and in the legacy of racial injustice and harm. Proportionately, American Catholics, I believe, have the potential to move from a place of collective moral injury and shame to leading the way in society and the broader church in shaping a brighter future toward restoration and healing. I feel that potential, and I hope you do as well. And again, we approach that with humility. We must be united in Christ and collectively accountable for this potential to be realized. As Professor Philpott was giving his talk, IRJH Board Chair Mary Novak was in St. Paul giving a talk on overcoming polarization. And in the church, restorative justice has so much potential to allow us to overcome the polarization that not only afflicts society, but afflicts the church. And Jesus says to us, it shall not be that way with you, right? We have to not enter into that polarizing dynamic in culture. What a terrific lineup of plenary panels and speakers and a great lineup of breakout sessions. Thank you to all of our colleagues who are taking part in the plenary panels and breakout sessions. I would like to thank Archbishop Shelton Fabre of the Louisville Archdiocese and Archbishop Bernard Hebda of the Archdiocese of St. Paul and Minneapolis. I'm tempted to say Minneapolis and St. Paul, but trying to get it right. I appreciate both of these church leaders for their presence at the conference and for their strong and humble embrace of restorative justice. The schedule is in your conference program. Take in as much as you can as we journey toward restoration together. Some of the topics we discuss will be heavy and may be a source of anxiety or trauma for some who are gathered. We have a meditation room here at the law school, the chapel down the hall, and colleagues who are happy to listen and accompany those who may benefit from these resources. In a very brief moment, I will invite my colleague Julie Craven to extend her welcome and to orient you to our space here at the law school. Before I do, I would like to offer my words of gratitude to Julie for all that she has done in advancing the work of RJ, our initiative at UST Law, and in helping plan and host this conference. Countless hours were spent by Julie and Caitlin Morneau and others planning this conference. After retiring from a very successful corporate career in communications and marketing, and I've learned some things from Julie in those two areas, Julie has brought passion and robust talent to what she describes as the most meaningful work that she has ever done. It's not without cost at times to Julie and to me, but thanks to her generosity of spirit, Julie does this work pro bono. We benefit greatly from Julie's excellent work and warm Irish charm. So grazie, Julie, and the floor is all yours. Thank you and welcome, everybody.
Yeah, so I'm like, stop, it's happening. No, keep it coming. Thank you, Father Griffith, and welcome to everyone. I'm so happy today is here. We are excited about the connections and the conversations that will take place the next 3 days. We are even more excited about how this conference will bear fruit in the years to come. I'm humbled to be here as well. When Father Griffith and I started this work, we would not have predicted where this would go. The community and parish work, teaching here at the law school, the programming and speaking opportunities have extended beyond our expectations. And with the launch of the initiative on restorative justice, all that work has a home. This is not what I was expecting to do in retirement, but it is indeed the most purpose-filled work I have done. As a young friend said to me when I was marveling about it, she said, "That Jesus is sneaky." This law school opened in 1923, and it closed 10 years later during the Great Depression. It reopened in 1999 with the mission to prepare students to lead with faith and reason, inspired by a commitment to social justice and excellence. Today, we have 540 of the most amazing law students, or as Dr. Amy Ullman often says, St. Thomas forms beautiful lawyers. If this is your first visit to the University of St. Thomas Law School, here's a brief orientation. We are in the atrium. All 5 of the plenary sessions will be held here, as well as breakfast and lunches. Later today, Archbishop Shelton Fabre will celebrate Mass right here. Mass tomorrow will be at noon with Monsignor Chad Guillen from the Diocese of Bismarck, right down this hall in our beautiful chapel. This building has great sight lines, and you can see virtually all the spaces we will use at the conference from right here. The 2nd, 3rd, and 4th floors have the conference rooms and the classrooms where the 18 breakout sessions will be held. The exhibitors are on the 2nd floor. We've got, okay, waving, okay. There are 3 banks of elevators and restrooms opposite this stage. For questions about parking, public safety, lost and found, the public safety officer is right back there. For questions about your name badge, the conference app, the registration table folks can help you. The schedule is in the program, it's on these screens, and it's also on the conference app. In addition to our fabulous Basilica volunteers, we have volunteers from Twin Cities Prison Ministry, as well as the University of St. Thomas School of Law. As Father mentioned, some of these topics get heavy. Be sure to take care of yourself. The meditation room is on the 2nd floor at the very end of the hall, last room on the right. In the Restorative Justice, Law, and Healing course that we teach, we always begin the first day of class by asking the students, why are you taking this elective course? Invariably, the answers are something like this. I'm going into juvenile justice. I'm going into child protection. I'm going into criminal justice. And this is the future of law. That vision is shared by Rob Vischer, who was the dean of the law school when we launched, and is certainly a champion of the initiative and a supporter of this work. He is now president of the University of St. Thomas. He is in Rome with the University Board of Directors, and he shares this welcome with all of you.
I am so happy to welcome you to St. Thomas. We are honored and excited to host the National Catholic Restorative Justice Conference. It's fitting to gather here in the Twin Cities, which has experienced the wrenching pain of the clergy sexual abuse scandal, and just a couple of miles from where you are gathered, the murder of George Floyd. One of the threads that has animated our work at St. Thomas over the past 138 years is our commitment to the ministry of accompaniment. That commitment finds powerful expression through the practice of restorative justice. In his encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis outlined several themes that are key to the work that you have undertaken. I'll briefly mention 3. First, he reminds us that dialogue is difficult but essential. In his words, dialogue calls for perseverance. It entails moments of silence and suffering, yet it can patiently embrace the broader experience of individuals and peoples. For when our conversations revolve only around the latest data, they become merely horizontal and cumulative. We fail to keep our attention focused, to penetrate to the heart of matters, and to recognize what is essential to give meaning to our lives. Second, Pope Francis implores us to shoulder the inevitable responsibilities of life as it is. Faced with so much pain and suffering, Pope Francis writes that our only course is to imitate the Good Samaritan. To do otherwise would make us either one of the robbers or one of those who walked by without showing compassion for the sufferings of the man on the roadside. We must remember that a community can be rebuilt by men and women who identify with the vulnerability of others, who reject the creation of a society of exclusion and act instead as neighbors, lifting up and rehabilitating the fallen for the sake of the common good. Third, Pope Francis tells us to keep real people at the center of our work. He writes that solidarity finds concrete expression in service, which can take a variety of forms in an effort to care for others. In offering such service, individuals learn to set aside their own wishes and desires, their pursuit of power, before the concrete gaze of those who are most vulnerable. He says that service always looks to their faces, touches their flesh, senses their closeness, and even in some cases suffers that closeness and tries to help them. Service, he says, is never ideological, for we do not serve ideas, we serve people. I want to thank all of you for living out these insights. Though I can't be with you in person, I will be praying for you, as are many others. This work is important. Thank you for your leadership and for your faithful witness of accompaniment. Welcome to St. Thomas.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to see your faces. Thank you so much for being here. I'm just going to check with our tech folks for a quick second. I want to make sure we have our two other panelists. If I'm seeing what you're seeing, I'm not seeing faces yet. Oh, hi, folks. All right, the gang is here. Well, welcome. Hi, Cheryl. Hi, Sister Helen. Thank you for joining us virtually. I'm so glad that you get to see them on the screens, too. So now that we're all here, we shall begin the session on the sign of the times. My name is Krisanne Vaillancourt Murphy. And thank you, Father Dan, for that wonderful start, and Julie for your gracious welcome. I have served as Catholic Mobilizing Network's Executive Director for the last 6 years. And it is a joy to be with you all today. Seeing this room full and your faces is so heartening, knowing all the work it has gone into pulling this together. So thank you so much. Whether you're joining here at the University of St. Thomas Law School or virtually, thank you for being with us. On behalf of CMN and the Initiative for Restorative Justice and Healing, we are overjoyed that you have chosen to enter into this sacred time of exploration, curiosity, sharing, listening, and reflection at the 2023 National Catholic Conference on Restorative Justice's Journeying Toward Restoration. As we gather here in the Twin Cities, we find ourselves in a significant moment in church history, one which Father Dan mentioned. In Rome, the Synod on Synodality is taking place. This synodal process, which began 2 years ago, has invited us into a special time of listening, praying, and communal discernment in the Catholic Church so we might better respond to the movements of the Holy Spirit. It's fitting that our conference coincides with the synodal convening because restorative justice is a tangible expression of synodality, with principles and practices that create space for the Holy Spirit to do its transformative work. Restorative justice equips us to reach out to those on the margins, and it encourages us to bind up unhealed wounds, the very essence of a synodal church. For the next hour, and it's only an hour, so I will remind us of the time as we go along, we have invited 4 incredible leaders to start us off. Sheryl Wilson, Sheryl Fairbanks, John Carr, and Sister Helen Prejean. Each nationally recognized for their deep knowledge, personal lived experiences, and decades of professional background in these focal areas to highlight the challenges and opportunities that they see. As Father Dan said, recognizing that our church has been at times wounder, and in these areas, yet the church has an enormous opportunity to help create the conditions for healing in these areas as well. I'll share more about their impressive backgrounds upon inviting their presentation. As we embark upon these next 3 days, what must we remember? What is critical that we not forget or that we pay attention to? We've invited each of these panelists to shed light into their deep well of experiences to establish a foundational context that enables us all to delve further into the 4 focal areas through plenary panels, breakout sessions, and interactive processes over these days. And for this panel, we will welcome your questions at the end. There are note cards on your table, so feel free to jot down questions as they come to you. And for those who are joining us virtually, please use the chat. At any point, you can post your questions, and we will collect them. A couple notes of important reminders. In terms of this session, Catholic Charities Twin Cities has graciously sponsored this panel, so we thank them for their support and generous encouragement. One more word about self-care. For those of you in the room, for those of you at home, just be attentive to your body, to your emotions and your needs. You learned about the room upstairs, but for those of you virtually, if you need a moment, step away from your computer. And if you need help, feel free to use the chat virtually if you need assistance. And finally, an invitation. Let us welcome the Holy Spirit into this place and into this space in our hearts, leaving room for new generative questions, learnings, and emerging insights. Join me in welcoming our panelists for the Signs of the Times panel. Sheryl Wilson, we're going to begin with you. You're a nationally known practitioner, trainer, and educator in restorative justice. Your initial degrees and career in restorative justice started here in the Twin Cities. You served as president of the National Association of Community and Restorative Justice, a professional organization for restorative justice practitioners, and only recently completed your term as president. For the last 6 years, you have directed KIPCOR, the Kansas Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution, where you mediate conflicts, teaching classes, and serve as an RJ trainer and facilitator. And as Dan said, last but not least, you serve on the board of CMN and IRJH, so we are so grateful you're here. But the first question for you, Sheryl, is from your intimate and professional knowledge as a restorative justice practitioner and leader working directly with impacted individuals and communities across the U.S., how would you describe the challenges and opportunities in the area of racial justice and healing in this time?
Well, thank you, Krisanne, and I'll give you that $5 for that intro at the break. I just first, before I delve into that, I have to just My heart is so full when I come home to my adopted home. So forgive me if I'm a little emotional right now, but I love this place. It is where I learned about restorative justice for the first time at University of Minnesota, but just saying. But we're all friends. I say that when I come here, I do feel the spirit. I was in my years of being here, not only was I falling in love with restorative justice, but I had been on my own spiritual journey trying to figure out what God was asking me to do next. What was my calling? And as I learned more about restorative justice, it was clear this is what I was called to do. So I speak from that spiritual place when I talk about this next part as I start to delve into the question you asked. I had to go to the good book of Prince. So I'm going to say I love music. I think musically, there's always a song playing, and every time we have talked about this since I knew the theme of this, for those of you who are Prince fans, you already know the song, right? Sign of the Times is this Prince song. Sign of the Times is his rendering of it. But I thought of that in terms of how he interpreted the times he was in. It was in the 80s when the song came out in 87. And the meaning behind the song can be interpreted a lot of ways, but at its core, he was giving a commentary on the state of the world at the time. And the song is a reflection of his perception of various events and things that were going on, like the spread of AIDS, natural disasters, war and conflict, political polarization, racism and discrimination, drug abuse, poverty and inequality. Are those things we're still dealing with today? I would dare say that song was prophetic, because Sign of the Times could be played today. And I just think about how, as we are in these times, as Father Dan talked about, ground zero for the racial reckoning. I can't even, when I came here for the launch 2 years ago, I said then that we were cracked open about all that had transpired in, it was 2021, so a whole year of living in the possibilities of what an inclusive society could look like and be like. How could we be better together? But what happened, sadly, is in these 2 years, somebody said that door is wide open. Well, that door is starting to close. And the reality is, when we talk about inclusivity, when we talk about anti-racism, and I dare I say, when I say those words, they're loaded political words now. And when I say them in certain groups, I get the glazed over look, or I get the looks away. But I'd say to you, as people who embrace this work, there are 3 things I would offer you in terms of how we connect with handling issues around racialized harm. One, we need to be aware of the times that we're in, know what's going on, know what laws are being passed, because it's becoming legal to whitewash our history now. It's becoming legal to not embrace anti-racism. I also would ask you, secondly, to live solidly in the times that you're in. Just because you know something, I know we have these aspirational ways that we want to be in community, but we have to deal with reality in that it is what it is. But restorative justice also has a place for people to live in difference. We don't have to take our balls and go home. We find ways to come together and find common ground. And that is truly what being restorative is all about. And lastly, I would say we need to trust the process of the times. If we're truly talking about the divine and allowing for the divine, for him to do, for the spirit to do what it is enabled to do, then we need to trust that this works. And it's in his time. It's in the time of the Creator. It is in the time that the Spirit says it's going to be. It's going to happen. And sometimes we have to push our own, we feel like we have to push our own agendas. But I would say in that way, for some of us, we need to stand down and trust those who have what is needed to minister, to deal with things in the time that the process would allow.
Cheryl, thank you. Thank you for those three sort of moments. I'm glad you've come home. Cheryl, just a really quick question, just a really short answer, but I do want to ask you this. I mean, you know the restorative justice landscape across the United States, and you know the many agents of change, and you have a sense of what the unique role is for faith communities, and I feel like folks want to hear what you think about what that unique role is.
I had some time to think about this because for the work that I do at KIPCOR, the Kansas Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution, we train educators in restorative practices. And what I would say has become really clear is though the work that we do in systems can't happen without community partners. And the community partners that we have really emanate from our faith-based communities. And so you do have a unique role, and it can't happen. The systems can't do it alone. Schools can't do it alone. The organizations that are trying to promote the work can't do it alone. So it's become very important that we have and we engage in our faith-based communities for that reason.
Great. I think you've got some great allies here. Thank you, Cheryl. Cheryl Fairbanks, over to you. Welcome. You carry the perspective of an attorney in the area of Indian law as a tribal court of appeals justice. You are currently the interim co-director at the University of New Mexico's Native American Budget and Policy Institute, and you have served as in Oregon as a distinguished visiting professor of law at Lewis and Clark, and a visiting professor of law at University of New Mexico's Southwest Indian Law Clinic. Lots of legal experience and leadership. And your leadership has been instrumental in reclaiming and reinstituting Native peacemaking processes, a close relative of restorative justice, in your own nation's judicial system. You've practiced Indian law, including tribal state relations, personal tribal courts, peacemaking and family conferencing, mediation, family school education, and indigenous law. So Cheryl, from your intimate and professional knowledge as an attorney, steeped in the ways of Native peacemaking, you have extensive experience and background in the area of intergenerational trauma and healing, as well as truth and healing work. what would you want this Catholic audience to know about Native peacemaking tradition and the opportunities to address harm against Native peoples?
Thank you very much. I appreciate that introduction and also the invitation to speak. I think that just reaffirming our journey towards restoration, I wanted to add and peace through spirituality and also through peacemaking. And we look at our restorative justice relatives, like you said, as our cousins. And we work quite closely with restorative and transformative justice. And in my language, I say "konashchish," which means thank you from my heart. And what I'd like to share a little bit about peacemaking with the participants here is I think where we would find common ground with peacemaking and the church is through the spirituality. And with our peacemaking, always starts with prayer. And that is a good way to set the sacred space that is needed when we're dealing with tough issues like we deal with every day, like the speakers before me have said. And so that spirituality will really allow us to get to the truth and the collaboration that is needed. And that spiritual layer is where we can find the common ground and build resolution. Because peacemaking is really an ancient process based on our tribal core values such as patience, love, honoring our children, our families, the will of respect. And so we have that challenge, and what better way for us to unify together, and because it's going to take all of us to do the heavy lifting together if we're going to make a change, whether it's within the general society or within our legal system. And so why? Because I really think through spirituality we can really bring our core values to the table, and they become universal values. We want to shift, taking the punitive out and the judgmental out, and shift to something that's much more spiritual. And so that we can move towards healing and transformation. With the shift, we're able to move toward a more holistic resolution, so that we can effectuate change and move toward healing, not just putting people away, incarcerating, or separating children from their families, that polarization that can happen so quickly. And peacemaking is really an excellent option. I say it's not an answer for everything, but it's an option. And one of the key reasons is whenever we have a continuing relationship like we have with each other, and our tribal communities are very close, we have to do something different. Otherwise, we begin that polarization, that my side wins, your side loses, and that can divide us quickly. And so with peacemaking, it's also very issue oriented. It's not sugar coated, and we say be tough on the issue and gentle on the person. And one of the other principles is that it's facilitated, and because we're dealing with people's lives, it has to be facilitated by someone with experience, so that we're bringing true lasting resolution. And it is a consensus model where people participate in the resolution of whatever the issue is. And one of our primary rules or guidelines. We're not like, we don't have boxes of codes and books and treaties, but we call them guidelines, and it's agreeing to disagree, but with respect, and therefore we can get clarity. One of the things we borrowed from our Hawaiian brothers and sisters is from the Ho'oponopono people, is to put it in the shade. Sometimes when the issues are so tough and there's a lot of emotion and a lot of anger, sometimes we have to put it in the shade and let it calm down a little and get back to a resolution mode and a consensus model. And so I borrowed also Cheryl from the great book, and I found so many Bible verses on peace, and it's those who promote peace. Let's see, those who promote peace have joy, coming from Proverbs. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God, coming from Matthew. Peace I leave with you, coming from John 14:27. Live at peace with everyone, Romans. Do what leads to peace, Romans 14:19. Live at peace with one another, Thessalonians 5:12. Make every effort to live in peace, Hebrews. Grace and peace be yours in abundance, Peter. And interestingly, when I was looking through some of the research, I found that in some of the papers, paper 48 to be specific, the Catholic Church really, suggests that we walk together in unity and that we begin to educate and to look at our weaknesses and our strengths and come together in partnerships and in equality and equity. And for Native people, that equity is an important piece for us because often we've been at the table, but someone else has been speaking for us. And we would like to have a voice in what, instead of the Indian problem, it can be the Indian solution. And so to deepen our relationship and so that we become, we align with each other and we build the alliances so that we can work together. In closing, I just wanted to say I also borrowed from the Great Law of Peace from the Iroquois people, and they had three main principles, and one was peace, equity, and unity. And their Great Law of Peace was established way back in the 1400s, and I think those three principles still are good for today. And so I say, consider peacemaking as an option. It's a way to bring resolution in a real spiritual way. And I think it aligns a lot with the Catholic principles. So for this one more principle that I had is when my husband was very sick, the Apache people sent this prayer, and it was called Bijaya. And I like to share it with you. And it means heal the heart and the rest will happen. Bijaya. Chish.
That is beautiful, Cheryl. Thank you so much. What great reminders of the richness of the peacemaking tradition from the Native people and also from the biblical tradition as well. So thank you so much. John, over to you. You are the founder of the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life at Georgetown University, an initiative that courageously brings together differing perspectives on critical issues facing the state and the church and society, including aspects of the focal areas that we're looking at in the conference today. Sometimes I visit the initiative just to remind myself that varying viewpoints can come together to find common ground for the common good. So thank you for your leadership there. And you had served for over 20 years as the director of the Department of Justice, Peace, and Human Development at the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, directing the conference's public policy and advocacy on major domestic and international issues, as well as sharing Catholic social teaching on human life, dignity, solidarity, faithful citizenship, and care for creation. It's hard to imagine a more faithful or influential leader in the Catholic community on faith and public life, John. You serve on the board of the law school here at the University of St. Thomas, and you are a native Minnesotan. So you have much significance here in this place, and this place has also been a place of harm, given the fact that you are a survivor of clergy sex abuse. So John, how would you describe the challenges and opportunities on the journey toward restoration, given the current ecclesial, political, and social forces right now?
Well, that's worth, I think, $20. I'm honored to be here, part of this remarkable panel. I am humbled. I am an amateur among experts on this, and I am happy to be here. Happy to be invited by Catholic Mobilizing Network, an enormous source of hope in our church, and St. Thomas Law School and this wonderful initiative. As Krisanne said, Minnesota is home to me. I'm a product of a mixed marriage. My mother is from St. Paul, my dad from Minneapolis. That's a bigger deal than most of you know. My mom's family was Republican, my dad's Democrat. My grandfather and father ran a clothing store about 5 blocks from here. So it's great to be back. I am honored to be a part of the founding board of this law school. And I was graduate of the first freshman class of St. John Vianney Seminary at St. Thomas University. Krisanne said I work at the intersection of faith and public life. That's sort of an accident. When I was growing up, I wanted to be a priest or I wanted to be a senator. I spent 8 years in the seminary and I fell in love with my wife Linda, and that took care of the priest part. I lost my first election for the Minnesota House, and that took care of the Senate part. But I have been blessed to find myself at the intersection of Catholic social teaching and public life. I live a much more boring life than Cheryl. When I hear Signs of the Times, I think of Vatican II, not Prince. The context for me, and I only have a couple minutes, is a paradox. We are doing the best work of our lives, and we're not where we want to be. Socially, just a word, the divisions, economic, political, cultural, racial. I grew up 10 blocks from where George Floyd was murdered. That could have been 1,000 miles. 1,000,000 miles for the gap between our life experiences. There are divisions that we don't even know. And politics is supposed to help us sort out those divisions and advance the common good. But now politics makes them worse. Ideology and partisanship have become identity and even a religion for many of us. Think of the last 3 years. We have lived through a violent insurrection, racial attacks, mass shootings. In the last week, a former president said that a leader of the Joint Chiefs of Staff ought to be executed, and the people who steal things ought to be shot. Our leaders seem incapable of coming together for the common good. Think about immigration. Think about gun safety, much less racial justice or restorative justice. They can't even pass a budget. That doesn't leave much room for the common good, for lifting up the least of these, or for restorative justice. Ecclesially, faith should help us bridge those divides. But sadly, our church now reflects them. The divisions are here, breaking us into camps. It's sort of a pick a pope ecclesiology. I'm on Team Francis. I'm a member of the John Paul II generation. I think there are some Benedict VI Catholics. There's an irony. Some of my friends who wanted to make sure that dissent was possible say, now that we have a pope who knows how to pope, get on board. And the guardians of orthodoxy, who used to lecture me and others to get with the program, now attack the pope, more Catholic than the pope. That resistance, in my experience, is powerful, well-funded, well-organized, and narrow. Most Catholics love Pope Francis. You put together Biden and Trump's approval rating together, it doesn't come close to Pope Francis' approval among Catholics. So while some of this is about doctrine, some of this is about how to be the church pastorally, I think a lot of it is about power. Ecclesial, economic, political power. When the Pope calls for mercy in the church, justice in the economy, and makes care for creation an essential part of Catholic life, that makes a lot of people nervous. That threatens the status quo. He makes me nervous. When he calls for a poor church for the poor, I'm uncomfortable. That's not my church. So we are not where we want to be, but I think we have some of what we need. I think there are signs of hope. I think the progress we've made on the death penalty is an enormous sign of hope. The mission and progress of this law school is an inspiration to me. And our little initiative at Georgetown, we've had 300,000 people join in our dialogues. And we have learned there is a hunger for the moral vocabulary of Catholic social teaching that provides an alternative to all this, a way forward for our wounded church and our divided nation. There is a thirst for civil and principled dialogue, and there is a new generation unburdened by our grudges and past battles. And one of our challenges is to invite them in instead of pushing them away.
Thank you, John. That was an impressive survey of the landscape. I want to ask you this quick question, though. So many in this room, so many that are joining us virtually, care so deeply about the church reestablishing right relationships for the harm that's been done. And what words of advice might you share about how we can get it right?
The clergy sex abuse crisis and the leadership that enabled it is personal for me. I've dealt with it over 60 years as a young teenager in a high school seminary 90 miles from here, working for dioceses, working for the bishops. Cardinal Law, Cardinal McCarrick were close co-workers of mine. I have to acknowledge the courage of others who spoke out. I did not, until in one of our 12 dialogues, I said that I had learned that silence was not an option and described what had happened to me. I am very much an advocate and admirer of restorative justice, But I think we have to be careful. Better put, and we have to be careful. Who restores? Whose justice? It is not for those who permitted, enabled, facilitated, covered up the horrors to call for healing and reconciliation. For me, restoration is less about the men who groomed me and harassed me and tried to abuse me. It's about the institution, the structures that allowed it, covered it up, facilitated it, made it pervasive in an institution. Baltimore is the 36th diocese to declare bankruptcy. And that may be the best way to handle a terrible situation, but the moral bankruptcy began a long time ago when we, the church, the bishops, the lawyers, made a terrible choice. They said we will exchange money for silence. Everyone who is in harm deserves compensation, but that is not the bargain that we need. The truth is, it has destroyed our credibility, it has compromised our leaders, it has hurt victims, it has starved our ministries. What we need is change, reform, responsibility, ownership, transparency. Who ministers? Who chooses the ministers? How are they formed? How are they held accountable? How do they work with others? My final piece of advice, and it sort of is jarring, is to remember the words of Mark Shields, our friend, who said, "You can tell the health of an organization by whether they're looking for converts or heretics." We need to encounter, engage, listen, and learn, not judge and condemn. The gospel is good news, and we ought to act like it.
Amazing. Thank you for all of that, John. Sister Helen, I just have to say, when Sister Helen and I chatted yesterday, she called me and she said, "Krisanne, I am just getting off of an opera tsunami." I don't know if you all know, but the Met just actually created or showing Dead Man Walking opera after like 30 years. It's incredible, and your life has been such a testament, Sister Helen. So thank you so much for joining us today. You have been a tireless advocate to end the death penalty, and it's hard to imagine anyone more important or influential in the national dialogue on capital punishment, which is the tip of the iceberg on the failed criminal legal system in this country. It's not a stretch to say that no one has done more than you to shape the Catholic Church's vigorous opposition to the deadly practice. For more than 60 years, you have been a sister of St. Joseph, a charism which birthed Catholic Mobilizing Network. From Dead Man Walking, the first book as a national bestseller, your first book as a national bestseller, and then the movie in 1996 with Susan Sarandon playing you and winning Best Actress in the leading role, to, again, your work on the opera as recent as last week. Sister Helen, your decades of experience walking with people on death row, people who are behind bars and considered disposable, and murder victim family members who find themselves overlooked and forgotten. How would you describe the challenges and opportunities in this often uphill battle to transform the criminal legal system in the United States?
The greatest challenge is the sound okay? Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
The greatest challenge is to take something that's secret for a few witnesses behind prison walls and make it visible. Jesus said that. What's invisible will be made visible. I have been brought in as a witness. I've accompanied 6 human beings to execution. I have watched that protocol of death. I have heard the legal language that makes it possible. And that makes a lot of people think, well, if it's the law, it has to be right. It has to be acceptable. But if you're not close to suffering, as the saying in Latin America goes, what the eye does not see, the heart cannot feel. And I got to tell you what I'm really happy about with the opera of Dead Men Walking at the New York Met with 4,000 people in that auditorium, what the opera by live drama and music to instruct the heart does is bring people close to the reality of what it means for the state, the government, to take a live human being after having already decided that this is the worst of the worst and this person we can kill, and take them and kill them. Kill them. That's the end product, is to kill them. And what's powerful about the opera, it's the only opera in the world with 1.5 minutes of silence. Because when you come to the end of this person's journey here, and the audience must attend because there's no music, there's no sound. The only sound is the sound of the machines pumping poison into the veins of the person to kill them, and the heartbeat of everybody witnessing and attending of what we're doing. My job is clear to me, that I'm a servant of the story, that I got drawn in. I wrote a man on death row. And the power of the gospel, it's always persuasive. It's through attraction. It's through call, invite. I wrote a man on death row, and reading the words of Jesus and the words of the gospel coming alive for me in the first time in my life. I was in prison and you came to me. I'd always, done a little spin job on that. I was in prison and you came. Well, other people do that. Well, there's a lot of ways of being in prison. Even if you're shy in a big group, you kind of like in prison. And I heard it. And you know what? In my book, River of Fire, where I described coming awake, that to follow the gospel was more than just practicing charity to those around me, but to do justice meant I had to leave that place of privilege out in the suburb and move in among African-American people in New Orleans who then became my teachers. That's when I learned about the other America, how all the rules were different, how people could, we went with Geraldine, our sisters went with Geraldine and her sick 3-year-old child at 11 o'clock at night to go sit in a hard plastic chair at Charity Hospital because she couldn't get health care. And it's where I began to learn from the people what was happening to them in America. And then in that soil, in that atmosphere, one day, coming out of the Adult Learning Center, I meet someone from the Louisiana Coalition on Jails and Prisons, and it was a simple invitation. Hey, Sister Helen, you want to be a pen pal to somebody on death row? And this is the sneaky Jesus part. Somebody already talked about sneaky Jesus up there. I thought I was only going to be writing letters. And when I could write some nice letters, I'm an English major, maybe a little poem. I had no idea that 2.5 years later, that man I wrote the letter to, Patrick Saunier, was going to be electrocuted to death, and I was going to be in that killing chamber with him. My eyes saw what most of us in this society will never see because it is a secret ritual. There have been 2 court cases to try to make executions public, and they have failed. Restorative justice is the opposite of secrecy, and whose end product is you kill the human being. It's the only thing in criminal justice where we imitate the behavior of the criminal to try to say that is what justice is. They killed and we're going to kill them. The victims' families are not just simply neglected, they are used, because any politician that wants to justify seeking the death penalty always says, we're going to do this to get justice for the victim's family. The average wait for an execution is 17 years. And I want to ask you, look at the moral bankruptcy that John referred to, moral bankruptcy in this. To offer a hurting family, traumatized, vulnerable, grieving, what we're going to offer to heal you is you're going to get to sit on the front row and watch the violence as we kill the one who killed your loved one, and you get to watch that, and we're going to call that justice for you. So what happened to me? I wrote the man, I witnessed his execution, came out of that execution chamber in the early morning hours, April 5th, 1984, and I was set on fire. I was set on fire because of what my eyes had seen, and I knew that people didn't know. It's not that the American people are bad or that we're particularly more vengeful than any other society, but just hopelessly ignorant and removed. And I have found over these 40 years, crisscrossing this nation, talking to people, telling the story, putting the book in their hands, bringing them close, watching the opera wake people up, watching the film wake people up, is that people are good. But they just don't know. And they easily buy into this surface soul stuff. Well, look, they killed, they did a terrible thing, we ought to kill them. That's without reflection, and that's why we need spirituality. It's why we need both intellect and why we need both reflection and meditation on the deep, deep things going on in our society. And that's my job. I stay busy, happily. It's really a good feeling to be a servant of a story and to be able to be a little part, tiny little part, of helping the awakening happen. That first has happened in me and keeps on happening in me. We have a terrible situation going on right now in Louisiana. We haven't had an execution in close to 20 years. People don't have heart for it anymore. The warden sure doesn't want to kill anybody at Angola. But we have someone who is the Attorney General of the state, who is fighting tooth and nail to keep a commutation process from happening, where the governor has the power in Louisiana, John Bell Edwards, good Catholic man, who said pro-life is more than just being against abortion, that the death penalty is against the dignity of persons, who wants to commute every one of the sentences on death row before he leaves office. And we have this Attorney General fighting tooth and nail, blocking the process right now and stymieing it. And we're in the middle of that battle right now in Louisiana, that he will not be able to stymie this process. When we are awake, we work for justice and we work to restore life. Victims' families need counseling. Victims' families who have had violence get divorced. Children whose siblings were murdered fall through the cracks. Victims' families need a lot of healings. They surely don't need to be offered the promise to wait 17 years to be able to witness as the state kills the one who killed their loved one. So we press on, each in our little way, each in our little way. Maybe we sometimes feel, oh, I'm only one little person, I can't do big things. No, we don't have to do big things because we're part of a community. And Jesus has said it's always going to be wheat and weeds coming up together, okay? Always. It's always going to be that mixed bag that we got on our hands. But each of us in our hearts, at this conference today where we're in the Catholic community listening, what is it God's calling me to do? But get knowledge, get information. We need facts, we need information so that the heart can do its work. And I'm glad to be a part of this today. Thank you for asking me.
Thank you, Sister Helen. You truly are tireless. It's amazing, and we've all been so inspired by that awakening for you, and you have awakened so many. We have just a couple minutes for questions, so please, at your tables, raise your hand if you've been writing something down on note cards. We're going to do a quick sweep. And if you have been putting them on the chat, we'll put them on note cards too. So we have a couple minutes for questions. This came from the virtual folks. And maybe I can, maybe over to Sheryl Wilson. How can churches be more supportive of those returning to the community?
I think one of the ways that churches can be supportive is by supporting programming and being a part. And I know there are churches who are currently already doing this. They're becoming the bridge. They're going into the facilities while these residents are getting ready to transition out. And they're doing the work of creating the community that they will be a part of. I think that is a wonderful way for people in churches to embrace returning citizens. And I'll stop there.
How about you, John? You know the church pretty well. How do you think that the church can support those returning to the community after incarceration?
The church has to be the church. Some of you know my brother David was from the Twin Cities, and he became the media columnist of the New York Times, but before that he was a crack addict in these streets. And awful stuff. He wrote a book about it. And after he went into about his 7th rehab, 6-month lockdown, he came out. He was the father of twin girls. And he got out, put a couple months together, and he went to his local parish. It was about 8 o'clock at night. And he knocked on the door with these 2 little girls. And the pastor came to the door, and my brother David says, I've been a bad person. I've been a bad husband. I've been a bad worker. I've been a bad son. I don't want to be a bad father. These girls need to be baptized. And the pastor, instead of saying, where you been? We have a program for that. You need to register. You need to get envelopes. Said 2 words. Welcome home. My brother David passed away in the newsroom of the New York Times. And but 6 months ago, his grandson was born and named David. And I think that pastor who said, welcome home, is a big part of the reason that he has a grandson named David.
Amen. Amen.
Good story.
Sheryl Fairbanks, a question for you related to the harms against Native people. You and I, when we chatted before the conference, we were talking about the Pope's apology to the Indigenous people in Canada on his trip in July of 2022. Can you share a little bit, because I think folks would want to know what the reactions were and how that landed for folks on the ground. Can you share a little bit about that? Ooh, I think you're muted.
There we go.
There.
Yes, I think, that, well, I was actually in Canada a few weeks ago, and I asked that question with, to the First Nations peoples, and it was mixed results. Some were a little aloof about it, some were, negative, but what came out is those who had been in residential school were very, very thankful. and it meant a lot for them to have that apology. And so I think that as we heal, I think that, that apology is going to be much, very, very meaningful, because we don't want to stay attached to the harm and stay attached to the negativity. We want to be able to release that and get out of victim mode, and so that we can move forward. But I think that for the most part, it was received with respect. But also now, where do we go from here? What is the next step, so that there can be some real action and some real healing?
Thank you, Cheryl. We're just kind of coming upon time. There is just one more question for Sister Helen. You have witnessed so many executions, and you keep the beat on what's going on really all across the nation. On the death penalty, how do you make executions public without it being something to celebrate? How do you find to share about them without leaving it to be fodder for people to celebrate who are pro-death penalty?
Yeah, well, I'm not in charge of that part of how it might be done, through TV or whatever. I'm in charge of the part of I know the story, and I know what it is to accompany a human being who has done a terrible, terrible thing, but to recognize and experience in them that there is more to them as a human being than the worst thing they've ever done. And to bring that dialogue and to bring that witness into every corner, including to my Catholic Church, including to Pope John Paul II, who paved the way for Pope Francis, who finally changed the catechism. Because the sticking point was kept upholding the right of the state to take life. And then in the dialogue with Pope John Paul, pointing out that in his encyclical, Evangelium Vitae, he had pushed the death penalty to the very edge, but yet he had upheld in cases of absolute necessity the state could execute. And don't you know, our Catholic DA, Harry Connick Sr. in New Orleans, quoted the words of the Pope saying every death penalty we get in New Orleans is an absolute necessity. And so it has to be firm, like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the inalienable right of every human being to life because of the inviolable dignity in the human person, and you can never put a state government in charge. So the whole thing of how it is going to be made public, the only way it's going to be made public is witness of people who have been close. And we do see movement away from the death penalty. Louisiana executed 8 people in 8.5 weeks in the 80s, and we haven't had an execution in 20 years. The fire's gone out. The people don't want to kill. And that is in people, that desire for life, that desire not to repeat the violence and the killing. And that's the gospel. That's the light of the gospel in us. And we keep following that current and keeping that fire lit.
Every opportunity to be a public witness. Thank you so much, Sister Helen. Sheryl Wilson, John Carr, Cheryl Fairbanks, Sister Helen Prejean, we are so grateful for your presentation, for your wisdom, and for all that you do to move toward restoration in our church and in our society. Thank you. Thank you all. We have a break now, so just a couple thoughts. We're going to start promptly at 4 o'clock, the next panel, which is on Catholic social tradition and restorative justice. So please feel free to step outside, get some air, use the restrooms, move around, stretch. You can even go upstairs at the exhibits for a couple minutes if you'd like. But please be back in your seats a couple minutes before 4 because we will start promptly. And also, again, a reminder that after the second session, Archbishop Shelton Faub will be the principal celebrant and homilist over the Mass for 5:30. So we're going to move into that kind of state for ourselves. And then finally, just another plug for that movie, the film and discussion tonight, Unguarded. You won't want to miss it. So happy break for a few minutes, and we'll see you back here before 4. Thank you.